chills.
Number 1. So I still remember this happening so vividly. It was terrifying to the point that I had to move rooms as I was too scared to sleep in my original one. So here's the story. It's a long one. The houses in this suburb were back to back, so basically there was a street, a line of houses, a fence sectioning them off, another line of houses, and then their street. The backyards were what touched each other, so you could basically climb your backyard fence and land in your neighbor's backyard. This is important to understand the layout, so I apologize. Towards the back of the house was the laundry room and then my room with a large glass door leading outside. It had windows on the side which sat on a concreted side passage that connected the front of the house to the backyard. My bed was pushed against the wall with the window above and next to it. 9-year-old me was a night owl. As a young kid, I used to pretend to go to sleep and wait for the all clear, then turn on the lamp and read my books. This particular night, it was windy, so you could hear the dry leaves being blown up and down the side passage. It was around midnight when I heard the leaves shifting and moving around outside a lot quicker than before. The noise was growing louder and louder, and it seemed to stop right by my window. The house is older and is on stilts, so my window would have been 2 to 3 feet off the ground. I heard a bang against the wall, then a scraping noise. I froze sitting in bed as that noise came from right behind me. I panicked as the scraping was more and more frequent, and I turned the lamp off and did what every child would do in that situation. I retreated under the covers and hid while listening. My heart was pounding. I can still feel the fear to this day. The noise stopped and I heard a crunching on the leaves as whatever it was walking away. I was trying to gather the courage to run to my parents' room, which was at the front of the house, but that meant I had to walk past the glass door. Then I heard a thump up the stairs to the back door, then the clamoring of the wind chimes. They were metal and hung low. Whoever it was could not see it in the dark and must have knocked them as they were peering in the door. I heard them grab it and throw them to the ground. This was followed by tapping and scratching, and they even tried the door handle. I screamed to high heaven, hoping Dad would wake up. I heard the person clamber away, so I got up and ran to my parents' room. Woke up Dad in a panic, declaring someone is outside. He took off with a baseball bat and no pants like the knight in shining armor he was. I don't know how long it was, but he came back and told me he could not find anybody and I should go back to bed. I refused and slept in the lounge room that night. It got to a point where I was so unsettled my parents had to shift all the rooms around to move me from that room. It was only years later when I was 20 and we were at a family dinner talking about things we did when we were young. I brought up that story. My dad turns to me and says, since we don't live there anymore, I guess I can tell you that I did find someone that night. He found our neighbor Bill, whom was the father of one of my friends from school. He was trying to climb over the fence when Dad caught him, and the first thing he said to my dad was, "Oh, did something make him scream?" Dad refused to tell me what happened after that, but that line chills me to this day. He found his ladder on its side near my window in the morning, which of course he did not tell me about either, as the creep was trying to climb into my room. Number 2. So around 10 to 12 years ago, I lived in a little 2-bedroom house on a long road. It is a terraced house on a long strip of other terraced houses. Back in the day, all the attics were joined and you could literally travel through them. Years later, they realized it was a bad idea, fire spreading, burglars, etc. And so all the attics were bricked up so each house was secure. One night, I was soaking in the bath when I heard a noise above me. Thinking it may be an animal or something, I just ignored it. This went on for a few weeks, only it was getting to the point where I could only hear the noise when I was in the bath or shower or getting changed. This went on for a few weeks, but it was getting to the point where I would only hear the noise when I was in the bath or shower or getting changed. I got a friend to check the attic and he told me he didn't see anything. He just stuck his head inside, which just confirmed my animal story. Not much happened after that for about a month or two when one night I was alone. I was getting ready to take a shower as I was heading out with friends. I heard the same noise above when all of a sudden the dog started going crazy, barking and looking directly above me. Clearly I was freaked out and decided to get ready at a friend's house. The next day I was outside my house when the neighbor shouted me, Now, my neighbor is creepy as hell, small, stinky, strange looking with a hint of crazy in his eyes. He asked if I was okay. Being polite and trying to show him he doesn't really bother me, I said yes and went about my business. Just as I got to my door, he asked if I got to my friends okay. At first, without thinking, I just said yes, thank you, smiled and waved goodbye. When I got inside my house, I realized that he would not know I was out of friends unless he heard me on the phone, and as I was so creeped out the night previously, I was practically whispering to my friend. Anyway, I rang family members, told my dad, and they all came around. They turned the lights on in the bathroom but kept all the other lights off. Opened the attic door and you could see 2 lights shining right through to the top of the attic, 2 tiny little holes. My bathroom ceiling was quite dark, so I never noticed them. My dad went in, he was gone a while, but when he returned he was blazing angry. He ignored everyone and walked straight outside to the neighbor's house. We heard him shouting for the neighbor to open the door, but he was not home. I asked my cousin to go up to check it out. When he came back down, he told me that the wall separating the attics had been knocked through. Most of the brickwork was on my side, so it was knocked through from the other side. We called the police, but they told us there was no proof he had done anything. The neighbor told the police he never used the attic, and the previous tenants may be to blame. Clearly, he was to blame, the old dirty pervert. I don't think I have ever been so disturbed knowing that the dirty pervert had been watching me for all that time. I never stayed in that house again. Number 3. Okay, so a little bit of a backstory. I am a 19-year-old male, was about 10 when this took place. I spent a large part of my childhood living in a town called Renfrew, Ontario, Canada, with my mom and her fiance at the time. It was a pretty average-sized town, calm, peaceful, and a relatively nice place. We lived in a house on a street that I believe was called Stewart Street. Life was pretty normal for the most part. Our driveway and our neighbor's driveway were both connected, so we had to park beside each other, and both houses were pretty close to each other. I never saw much of my neighbor, other than the occasional time he was in his backyard, probably tending to his garden. He was a middle-aged man, probably 40 or 50, and he never said hello or acknowledged me or my family when we looked at him or walked past him in the driveway. Everything continued as normal as ever, until one night when I headed into my room to go to bed. My room had one window, and it faced out towards the driveway. I had blinds, but they were always slightly open so I could see through the open gaps. On this night, as I lay in bed, I could hear crunching in the gravel on the driveway. I never thought anything of it and assumed it was probably my mom's fiance outside doing something, but no, I was very wrong. I turned over in bed to face my window, and as my eyes slowly adjusted in the dark, I could see through the gapes of the blinds that there was a pale face looking through my window, staring directly at me. I made eye contact, and I couldn't look away. I was so horrified that I almost wet the bed. I tried to scream out for my mom, but I was too scared of him hearing me and breaking through the window. He continued to stare, but it was almost as though he was looking off into the distance towards me, like someone who was zoned out. Finally, he slowly raised his head up to the roof, and he started screaming at the top of his lungs, "Shut up, you birds! Shut up! Shut up!" The second he started screaming, I got chills. The creepiest part of it all was that there were no birds chirping, no noise, nothing other than him. His screaming was so serious and so full of rage that it felt as though he was legitimately enraged by these imaginary birds. Somehow everyone in the house except me managed to sleep through the screaming, which went on for almost the entire night. I did not sleep a wink, and that man didn't leave my window until about 4 a.m. When morning came, I was far too scared to tell my mother about what had just happened. I just went about as I usually did. The door we entered the house from was in the backyard, which meant when we left we had to walk through the driveway. Usually my neighbor was never outside, but one day while I was walking to the school, he was standing in the driveway about to get in his car. I did my best to look down and avoid him, walking as close to the wall of my house as possible, when I noticed out of my peripherals that he was standing completely still, holding his car door open, watching me walk. My eyes naturally darted towards him, and I could see his eyes watching me, full of something I can only describe as intent. His nighttime screaming continued, always telling the birds to shut up, occurring about every other night. On the nights that he didn't show up, I had chronic nightmares about him opening my window, and my grades started to suffer. I was in a constant state of terror. Eventually, I realized that I had no choice but to tell my mom what was going on. I woke up after one of my nightmares and went into her room and told her about our neighbor. She attempted to assure me I was only imagining it and I was only dreaming. The rest of the story is from what my mom told me years later when I was much older, because I was too young to hear about it. After I told my mother about what was happening, she and her fiance decided they should closely pay attention to our neighbor. One night they were having a few drinks and playing frisbee in the backyard. My mom threw the frisbee and it landed on the grass in our neighbor's yard. My mom walked right on over into the yard. There was no fence separating us, and picked up the frisbee. It had landed quite close to the neighbor's window. She bent down to pick it up, and as she stood back up, she caught a glimpse in the window into the kitchen of the house. The entire kitchen counter was covered in porn magazines. Sex toys were strewn about. My mom and her fiance started freaking out, assuming he was a pedophile or something, and they marched straight to his door and started banging on it. The door had a window, and they could see the neighbor through it in the hallway, but he looked different somehow. He turned around, shocked by the loud banging, and revealed a face covered in makeup. Bright red lipstick, mascara, women's clothes, etc. The man was a cross-dresser. Normally, it wouldn't be such a big deal, but there was something clearly wrong about this man. Every alarm was going off, and my mom felt as though he may have someone in his basement or something. He ran away and then came back and answered the door a few minutes later, face washed and regular clothes on. My mom and her fiance flipped out on him, asking him why he was screaming at my window, what was with all the porn, etc. I was never told what he replied to all of this. My mom called the cops and they ended up coming and searching his house. Inside they found tons of child porn. I have an idea of what that man wanted with me, but I have no idea what he was on about with the birds. Clearly, he had some sort of mental condition. All I can say is that I am so glad I don't live there anymore. I have a few more stories of that town, because it was full of creeps for some reason, but those are for another day. Number 4. This actually happened to me when I was younger. Here it goes. When I was 10 years old, I was seriously into spy stuff. Anything to do with spies, I wanted it, and that was that. I had a little notebook besides my bed that I would write all of the car registration plates in my estate down to keep track of everyone and to identify potential intruders. I never did find anything interesting, but in my young mind, I was the next Harriet the Spy. Love that movie. I used to share my spy activities with April, the girl next door, because she indulged them and seemed to enjoy snooping about with me. My mom had bought a set of binoculars during the Celtic Tiger because, well, she could. Once I discovered these, I used them to constantly look at the birds up close in the sky, at people far down the street, and of course, into my neighbors' houses. The neighbor directly across from my house was a single man in his 40s who very much kept to himself. I would sometimes watch him through my binoculars, but he was boring, would always just sit in his bedroom. April and I would make up stories about his house being haunted, and we'd freak ourselves out so much that at least one of us would go home, pretending to feel unwell. When April suggested that we ditch the baby crap and become real spies, I was intrigued. The plan was to sneak into our creepy neighbor's house. That was it. We were only 10, we had no agenda. Creepy neighbor always left his kitchen window open, even when he was at work, so we climbed in. It was 4 p.m. in the middle of July. It was hot, sunny, and we were very much alone in this man's house. I always get this feeling of pure terror whenever I enter a premises I'm not supposed to be in. It's the stress of being caught and has always freaked me out. Anyway, I remember feeling that sort of fear, but April was jitty and jogged up the stairs. I waited in the kitchen, eyes fixed on the frosted front door, and half imagining creepy neighbor's shadow to suddenly appear. Michael? I could hear April's voice weak stamper my name from upstairs, and I immediately didn't like it. I had to get out. I quickly climbed out of the kitchen window and ran back across the road, leaving April alone in the creepy neighbor's house. I knocked at April's door and told her grandmother, who she lived with, where she was. Relief washed over me as I watched the small, fat, old woman waddle across the road to get her granddaughter. Before she reached the front door, April burst out wide-eyed and crying. My mom would not tell me why the police came, but I secretly watched with the binoculars from my bedroom window as they made creepy neighbor's dull, quiet house come to life with lights and loud talking. I looked into his bedroom where 2 policemen were standing side by side staring at the wall, at pictures on the wall. I will never forget that moment when I finally got those binoculars into full focus and saw myself in a framed photo on creepy neighbor's wall. I was in my own front garden making a daisy chain. I must have been only about 2 years old. That's when I noticed the others. There were about 50 pictures of me at all different ages on my neighbor's bedroom wall. He was arrested at work that day, caretaker in the local primary school. That's all I can remember from that time. April and I never spoke again after the incident, but she still lives next door to me and has her own daughter called Leah. It still shakes me, 14 years later, that while I was out spying on all the neighbors, there was one spying on me, and I never knew. Number 5. I'm so scared right now. I don't know how many of these are true, but if anyone has ever experienced anything like this, please let me know because I'm shitting myself. Here's some background. I'm 24. I live in London in the flat I grew up in. It's a huge split into 2 flats. One is council and one is owned. The flat upstairs is a sort of rehabilitation house, so my neighbors are always changing. Usually if someone doesn't react well to living in the real world, they're taken back to the hospital and I get a new neighbor. I've actually been pretty lucky in this sense and haven't had any problems with anyone. So about 4 months ago, Daniel moved in. Now occasionally, mostly if a new neighbor has been involved in a crime, I'll get a visit from a social worker of some sort explaining that if any previous problems arise again, to call said number, blah blah. This tends to happen if they've had a violent past, although they never divulge any real personal information about the crime or the neighbor. Anyway, so he moves in and for about the first week, I don't hear anything from him. I usually make a point of being friendly with my neighbors, considering we share the same building and they usually have some mental issues. However, every time I knocked for him, there was no answer. Eventually I gave up and slipped a note under the door explaining who I was and telling him to let me know if he needed anything. 2 days later, I was coming home from golfing with some friends when we met in the hall. He seemed nice enough. Obviously, this helped me to feel better about the situation, and after our chat, I felt more at ease. We had a lot in common. We shared a lot of the same interests. We were both huge Arsenal fans. I explained that I had just been golfing, and he told me how he considered himself a golfer too. I reiterated the note telling him to let me know if he needed anything. I felt so much more at ease as I went to bed that night. Writing this all now seems so messed up, but I guess I have to explain the story. So anyway, long story short, we got closer during the next 2 weeks or so. He'd come around to watch the footy at mine a few nights after work and shared conversation over some beers. He told me about rehab. He explained that he'd previously been in a toxic relationship that had driven him close to insanity. It was strange because I've never been so open with a neighbor. As accepting as I was of the upstairs residents, I usually keep my distance. But although I could never personally see myself getting into a situation like Daniel did, I felt like I understood his point of view and feelings. He seemed like a nice guy who had a bad thing happen to him and became emotionally unsteady for a while. We ended spending a lot of time together. When you live in the same building, it's so easy to end up doing so, but it's not something I dwelled on. We got along really well, liked the same music, football teams, sports. It was good. So anyway, one day I came home after a long day at work. My boss had been a dick all day. I was tired and wanted to sleep. Daniel must have heard me come in because he came to his door and asked if he could come in. I told him I wasn't really up for it. He looked a bit disappointed, but I had just had a shitty day and I just wanted to go to sleep. When going to bed, I noticed something really weird. This literally gives me shivers now thinking about it. There was an imprint of a body on my sheet, like someone had just been lying there. I just kind of stared at it. I racked my brain, but I knew I hadn't laid on it since I made it this morning. In fact, I hadn't even remembered making it. Regardless, I was just too tired to really care. I just pulled back the sheets and went to sleep. Over the next few weeks, I saw less of Daniel due to a number of reasons: work, other commitments, and generally, I felt like I needed space. We'd gotten very close and that was cool, but especially being in such a close capacity, the friendship seemed a bit too intense. I did feel bad for Daniel. He hadn't done anything and I'd blown him off for quite a bit, but I needed my own space. One night, I brought a female friend home from a night out, as she lived far away and buses had stopped running. It was around 4 in the morning, so I tried to be quiet as I walked in the communal hallway. As I was unlocking the door, I heard footsteps in my flat. I was high at the time and freaking out, but didn't want to freak out my friend. I grabbed a golf club from my hallway and crept into the kitchen where the noise was coming from. I turned on the light and ran in, and Daniel was there. He was just sitting on my counter smiling. I swear to God, I've never been so freaked out in my entire life. Obviously, I asked him what he was doing in my kitchen at 4 in the morning, and he said something about borrowing some milk. I asked him how he got in, and he went silent. He asked who my friend was, and the tone, it's hard to describe, but it was like he was my wife or something. It had a kind of jealous pang to it. He left, and me and my friend made our way to bed. But this is the weirder part. My bed had been laid in, but fully laid in. My TV was on and my wardrobe was open. How long had he been in there? The next morning I couldn't shake it from my head. It was so weird that it was too weird. I wasn't sure whether or not to call the social worker. In hindsight, I should have then and there, but I didn't because I completely avoided him. I think he knew he overstepped the mark because he didn't try to talk to me either. So that brings us here. The other day my mom called. She was asking about work, etc., and I told her I was thinking of quitting. Not to go off track, but my boss is a prick. He was keeping me on late, underpaying me, and just generally taking the piss. We ended the conversation and I went to bed. Fast forward to 2 mornings later, today, I go to work, my boss isn't there. I'm happy, going about my day, until a close colleague approaches me. He tells me the boss was hit with a golfing club last night and is in the hospital. Now I feel bad for feeling happy that he wasn't in. He's going to be fine and they've got 2 suspects, but they haven't revealed who they are. As I said, my boss is a dick, so as bad as it sounds, I'm hardly surprised he has a lot of enemies. So I came home tonight feeling a bit chirpier as I'd had an easy day at work. There's a letter through my door from the social worker telling me to call her. I do it and she tells me Daniel's been arrested. Writing this, it seems as if it was obvious the whole time. But you've got to understand that life isn't like a film. You don't expect this shit to happen to you. Yeah, maybe someone on the news in some faraway American town, but not in my flat in London. She tells me she can't tell me anything else, but I just knew. By this point, I'm freaking out even more. I went upstairs and just kicked the door down. I've never done anything like that. It was just something out of a film, but my body was pumping with adrenaline and I needed to know what was going on. Oh my God, it makes me sick to write this. I'm alone in my flat and I'm scared. I'm 24 and I'm scared to be in my house. I went into his room, directly above mine. There's nothing that out of the ordinary. It's a lot like my room actually. Wardrobe, Arsenal posters, but there's one weird thing. There's a camera pointing down at the floorboards, but it looked like he just put it down there, so I didn't think anything of it. But above it were tapes. I had no idea he made films, but looking closer, all the boxes had my name on it, and things I did, aka talking to mom, watching TV, with girl. My stomach is twisting at this point. I'm just thinking, please no, please no. I switched on the videotape and there it is, a clear gap between the floorboards that focuses on my bed. It's just above my wardrobe, so I never spot it. Obviously, I called the police. They came straight away and I finally found out the truth about his past and his toxic relationship. He had stalked this girl that he went to school with, and she had to move before he was finally admitted. The police had just left and I'm alone in my flat. My neighbor has been watching me for 4 months from a hole in my roof and I just found out. I'm terrified. Before you go, I wanted to tell you about the giveaway I'm hosting. But first off, thanks for watching, and leave a like so I know you made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe because I upload new videos every week. My name is Chills, and I'm thanking you all for your support by giving away 3 $100 Amazon.com gift cards. It's completely free to enter, and you can enter the giveaway by visiting the link at the very bottom of the description. It doesn't matter when you're watching this video, because top15s.net/giveaway will automatically direct you to my most recent giveaway. See the terms and conditions on the linked page for full details. If you want to follow me on social media, my Twitter is at YT_chills, and my Instagram is at DylanIsChillinYT, with underscores instead of spaces. Feel free to send me a DM if you have any questions or suggestions. See ya.